Storm over Warlock. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. Storm over Warlock by Andre Norton. Chapter 2. Death of a Ship. That sigh of displaced air was not as loud as a breeze, but it echoed monstrously in Sean's ears. He could not believe in his luck as that sound grew fainter, drew away into the valley he had just left. With infinite caution, he raised his head from his arm, still hardly able to accept the fact that he had not been sighted, that the Trogs and their flyer were gone. But that black plate was spinning out into the sun haze. One of the beetles might have suspected that there were Terran fugitives and ordered a routine patrol. After all, how could the aliens know that they had caught all but one of the survey party in camp? Though with all the Terran scout flitters grounded on the field, the men dead in their bunks, the surprise would seem to be complete. As Sean moved, Taggy and Togi came to life also. They had gone to Earth with speed, and the man was sure that both beasts had sensed danger. Not for the first time, he knew a burning desire for the formal education he had never had. In camp, he had listened, dragging out routine jobs in order to overhear reports and a small talk of specialists keen on their own particular hobbies. But so much of the information Sean had thus picked up to store in a retentive memory he had not understood and could not fit together. It had been as if he were trying to solve some highly important puzzle with at least a quarter of the necessary pieces missing, or with unrelated bits from others intermixed. How much control did a trained animal scout have over his furred or feathered assistants? And was part of that mastery a mental rapport built up between man and animal? How well would the wolverines obey him now, especially when they would not return to camp where cages stood waiting as symbols of human authority? Wouldn't a trek into the wilderness bring about a revolt for complete freedom? If Sean could depend upon the animals, it would mean a great deal. Not only would their superior hunting ability provide all three with food, but their scouting senses, so much keener than his, might erect a slender wall between life and death. Few large native beasts had been discovered on Warlock by the Terran explorers, and of those 4 or 5 different species, none had proved hostile if unprovoked. But that did not mean that somewhere back in the wildlands into which Sean was heading, there were no heretofore unknowns, perhaps slyer and as vicious as the wolverines when they were aroused to rage. Then there were the dreams, which had afforded the prime source of camp discussion and dispute. Sean brushed coarse sand from his boots and thought about the dreams. Did they or did they not exist? You could start an argument any time by making a definite statement for or against the particular sort of dreaming reported by the first scout to set ship on this world. The Cirrus system, of which Warlock was the second of 3 planets, had first been scouted 4 years ago by one of those explorers traveling solo in survey service. Everyone knew that the first-in scouts were a weird breed, almost a mutation of Terran stock. The reports were rife with strange observation. So an alarming one concerning Cirrus, a yellow sun such as Sol, and our 3 planets was not so rare. Which, the world nearest in orbit to Cirrus, was too hot for human occupancy without drastic and too costly world changing. Wizard, the third out from the sun, was mostly bare rock and highly poisonous water. But Warlock, swinging through space between 2 forbidding neighbors, seemed to be just what the settlement board ordered. Then the survey scout, even in the cocoon safety of his well-armed ship, began to dream. And from those dreams a horror of the apparently empty world developed, until he fled the planet to preserve his sanity. There had been a second visit to Warlock in check. Worlds so well adapted to human immigration could not be lightly thrown away. And this time there was a negative report. No trace of dreams. No registration of any outside influence on the delicate and complicated equipment the ship carried. So the survey team had been dispatched to prepare for the coming of the first pioneers. And none of them had dreamed either. At least, no more than the ordinary dreams all men accepted. Only there were those who pointed out that the seasons had changed between the first and second visits to Warlock. That first scout had planeted in summer. His successors had come in fall and winter. They argued that the final release of the world for settlement should not be given until the full year on Warlock had been sampled. But the pressure of immigrant control had forced their hands. That and the fear of just what had eventually happened, an attack from the Throgs. So they had speeded up the process of declaring Warlock open. Only Ragnar Thorvald had protested that decision up to the last and had gone back to headquarters on the supply ship a month ago to make a last appeal for a more careful study. Shann stopped brushing the sand from the tough fabric above his knee. Ragnar Thorvald. He remembered back to the port landing apron on another world. Remembered with a sense of loss he could not define. That had been about the second biggest day of his short life. The biggest had come earlier when they had actually allowed him to sign on for survey duty. He had tumbled off the cross-continent cargo carrier. His kit, a very meager kit, slung over his thin shoulder, a hot eagerness expanding inside him until he thought that he could not continue to throttle down that wild happiness. There was the waiting starship, and he, Shann Lantee, from the dumps of Tyr, without any influence or schooling, was going to blast off in her, wearing the brown-green uniform of survey. Then he had hesitated uncertainly, had not quite dared cross the few feet of apron lying between him and that compact group wearing the same uniform, with a slight difference, that of service bars and completion badges and rank insignia, with the unconscious self-assurance of men who had done this many times before. But after a moment that whole group had become in his own shy appraisal just a background for one man. Shann had never before known in his pinched and limited childhood, his lost boyhood, anyone who aroused in him hero worship. But he could not have put a name to the new emotion that added so suddenly to his burning desire to make good, not only to hold a small niche in survey, which he had already so painfully achieved, but to climb until he could stand so in such a group talking easily to that tall man, his uncovered head bronze yellow in the sunlight, his cool gray eyes pale in his brown face. Not that any of those wild dreams born in that minute or two had been realized in the ensuing months. Probably those dreams had always been as wild as the ones reported by the first scout on Warlock. Shann grinned wildly now at the short period of childish hope and half-confidence that he could do big things. Only one Thorvald had ever noticed Shann's existence in the survey camp, and that had been Garth. Garth Thorvald, a far less impressive, one could say smudged, copy of his brother. Swaggering with an arrogance Ragnar never showed, Garth was a cadet on his first mission, intent upon making Shann realize the unbridgeable gulf between a labor hand and an officer-to-be. He had appeared to know right from the first meeting just how to make Shann's life a misery. Now, in this slit of valley well away from the domes, Shann's fists balled. He pounded them against the earth in the way he had so often hoped to plant them on Garth's smoothly handsome face, his well-muscled body. One didn't survive the dumps of Tyr without learning how to use fists and boots and a list of tricks they didn't teach in any academy. He had always been sure that he could take Garth if they mixed it up, but if he had loosed the tight rein he had kept on